everyone, Josh here from JDA Films Productions. In this video I'll be reviewing my top 10 favourite Stephen King adaptations. In my first review video I did briefly mention about how much I am a fan of his works, so I'll be explaining more about that as well. My discovery of Stephen King books began when I was 13 years old. I came home from school when a family member bought me a copy of The Shining. I started reading it that night and I was hooked from the first chapter, finding it simply impossible to put down. Not only did it enthrall me, it also terrified me beyond belief. As soon as I finished it, I felt the desperate need to explore more of King's books. When collecting and reading more of them, my interest in his stories increased and continues to do so this day. Throughout the years, I've been collecting his books, film adaptations and memorabilia. He is, and still remains to this day, my all-time favourite author. So, without further ado, here are my top 10 favourite adaptations from the master of macabre. Jessie Burlingham and her husband Gerald go away for a weekend at their remote lake house. To spice things up with their intimacy, Gerald handcuffs Jessie to the bed. The act takes a turn for the worse when Gerald suddenly dies of a heart attack. Jessie is trapped and has to fight for survival and fight her own demons in her own mind at the same time. Now that may sound like a very small plot. It is compared to King's other stories, but yet so much happens within it, which makes it bigger than it seems. The director, Mike Flanagan, did an incredible job at keeping it close to the novel, whilst making small differences, which worked brilliantly. Like the book, he added a great sense of claustrophobia. You really felt that Jessie was so isolated from civilization, making you constantly think about what would you do in this situation, at times feeling that it was impossible to survive. He also kept to the pacing of the book, which he replicated brilliantly. It is a slow burner, but yet it doesn't feel that way because of the constant atmospheric dread. The performances from the cast were fantastic, especially the main actress who plays Jessie, Carla Gugino. Her performance really enhanced the film's atmosphere, making it more powerful. She gives it 110%. The film at times is beautifully hypnotic, which adds more depth of feel to the story. It either looks like a beautiful painting or a portrait of a nightmare. It's definitely a film worth watching and definitely a story worth reading. They are both amazing in their own right. So there you have it, there's my 10th best adaptation, and now here comes my 9th. Famous novelist Paul Sheldon has a car accident in the Rocky Mountains in a snowstorm. His number one fan, Annie Wilkes, rescues him, takes him back to her house, and nurses him back to health. She seems sweet and innocent until she discovers that her favourite character from Paul's books, Misery Chastain, has been killed off. Annie turns out to be a complete psychopath and forces Paul to write a new book, Resurrecting Misery. He's now writing to stay alive. Like Gerald's game, it has a large sense of claustrophobia because again, the main character is trapped in a location which is in the middle of nowhere. This was a big essence in the book, which was fantastically captured by the director Rob Reiner, who also directed the adaptation of the King novella, The Body. The film was called Stand By Me, which was amazing. What made this film really stand out were the incredible performances by Kathy Bates, who played Annie Wilkes, and James Caan, who plays Paul Sheldon. They were both second to none. Kathy Bates even won an Academy Award for Best Actress for this role, which was highly deserved. She was terrifying and made the role completely her own. Throughout the novel, Annie Wilkes' character was rather strict and actually rather unlikable from the very start, which I wouldn't say was a bad thing. However, Rob Reiner changed that in the film, with Annie Wilkes' character starting off incredibly sickly sweet, to then flick the switch, turn into a complete psycho, which Kathy Bates handled to perfection. And I actually have to say, I prefer that element in the film because it can lure audiences into a full sense of security, thinking, she's lovely, what could happen? But then, flick, uh-oh. For the cinematography, it was incredibly creative because since the location is so small, it still kept my eye captivated to the screen. I could not recommend this film enough, it is amazing. So there you have it, there is my 9th best adaptation, and now be prepared for my 8th. A writer called Ben Mears returns to his hometown, Salem's Lot, in Maine, to write a new novel. At the same time, a mysterious stranger called Richard Straker arrives, with plans to run an antique shop with his partner, Kurt Barlow. Suddenly, people in the town start disappearing and dying very quickly. The people are turning into bloodthirsty vampires, and Ben Mears must fight for survival and get to the source of this horrific plague. I've read the book several times, and to this day it remains one of my all-time favourites. And not only is it a favourite of mine, it is also one of the scariest books I have ever read. Every time I reread it, I still get shivers down my spine. Directed by Tobe Hooper, directed the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, did an amazing job on bringing the story to the screen. This is actually a TV miniseries. Because of it being quite a large book, the producers wanted to capture as much of the story as possible, and let me just say they did an amazing job. There are a lot of side characters in the book, and not all of them were in the film, but the most important ones were there. For example, Jason Burke, the Glick brothers, Larry Crockett, Bill Norton, Mike Ryerson, and Officer Parkins. And with these characters, it still did keep very well to the source material. But the one element that was virtually identical to the novel was the pure atmospheric terror with beautiful pacing. The scares and the attention to detail on the vampires were stunning. However, the biggest element from the book that was changed in the film was the character of the head vampire, Kurt Barlow. In the novel, he was the modern-day Dracula, good-looking, suave, sophisticated with a European accent. In the film, his character was a recreation of Max Schreck's vampire from the 1922 film Nosferatu. The producer, Richard Kobritz, did this because the version of Dracula from the book has been used constantly at the time. Instead, Barlow was used as a barbaric animal, with Straker keeping guard and obeying his duties. Straker also did this in the book, but was very rarely seen. King really did like the film, but he wasn't a huge fan of the recreation of Barlow, which I can totally understand because I prefer Barlow in the book as well. Don't get me wrong, it didn't ruin the film for me, I still thought Barlow was wicked. The other change which I did like was Straker's character. As I mentioned earlier, you don't see him very much in the book, but when you do see him, you immediately feel that there is something incredibly sketchy about him. His mannerisms are so creepy, and he has this death-like stare in his eyes, and he speaks incredibly slowly. Whereas in the film, he came across as a bit of an oddbod, but very approachable and very polite. The actor who plays Straker, James Mason, played the part very well. The rest of the film's characters kept very well to the book as well, especially the three main characters, Ben, Susan and Mark. They were pretty much replicated from the book. The actors are David Soul as Ben, Bonnie Bedelia as Susan, and Lance Kerwin as Mark. I'd say they were brilliantly casted. So there you go, there's my 8th best adaptation, and now here comes my 7th. Troubled teenager Carrie White is bullied every day by her classmates and is trapped within a broken home with her mentally unstable religious mother, Margaret. During these events, Carrie finds out that she has telekinesis, a power to move things with her mind. One day, Carrie is invited to the high school prom, and the main bully, Chris Hargensen, and her friends plot a hideous prank for her for the event. It goes to plan, and now Carrie uses that very power of hers for revenge. Now, I know a lot of you out there would highly disagree on why I chose this version instead of the original, and I can totally understand why. The original is brilliant, and it still does hold up today, especially Sissy Spacek, who plays Carrie. She was superb and made the role particularly scary. Usually, I'm really sceptical on upcoming horror remakes. I feel that most of the time they are just so unnecessary because the originals are just that good. And when I found out that Carrie was being remade again, I did feel really nervous. Especially when I found out that Chloe Grace Moretz was playing the role as Carrie. Don't get me wrong, she's an amazing actress, but I was just so used to seeing her play a badass superhero in the Kick-Ass films. Wow, was I wrong in thinking that she wouldn't be able to nail the role. She most certainly did. This was because her character was adapted like she was in the book. In the original film, most of the time, Carrie was quite weak and simpering. She was similar to that in this version as well at times, but she did show much more of a backbone when it came to fighting back with her mother, which I thought made Carrie much more of a likeable and stronger character. She especially showed more of this during the prom scene. I absolutely loved how she was more calculating with her victims. She even let some of the victims survive, leaving them traumatised on what happened that night. Whereas in the original, she just obliterates everyone. With this version, I also absolutely loved the final standoff between Carrie and Chris Hargensen. The fight was tense, and again felt more personal, making sure that Chris gets exactly what she deserves. In the original, there is a standoff, but I felt it didn't have a build-up and it finished too suddenly. However, the only thing I do prefer in the original is the prom scene where Carrie unleashes her telekinesis. She was a lot scarier, and it was because throughout the whole attack, she has this amazingly terrifying stare in her eyes. So there we have it, there's my 7th best adaptation, and here comes my 6th. Cynical writer Mike Enslin usually writes books on evaluating supernatural events in many different locations, debunking the mysteries behind the hauntings. One night he stays in the Dolphin Hotel in New York to stay in the room 1408, which is permanently unavailable to guests because of the many deaths that occurred in the room over the years. As Mike stays in the room, he soon realises that all the terrifying rumours are true. This is based on the short story from the book called Everything's Eventual. It's absolutely fantastic, it really is an effective story. But in a really positive way, I found that it was more of a template for the film, which I felt gave a lot of freedom for the director, Mikael Hafström, to increase depth to the story, character development, and effective scares. He did this all tremendously, including adding in an amazing cast, with John Cusack playing Mike Enslin and Samuel Jackson as the hotel manager, Olin. Once again, we're dealing with another story that has a huge sense of claustrophobia because of the main character being trapped in one location throughout most of the film, with the dreaded sense of a foreboding atmosphere, where the situation for the main character gradually gets worse and worse with perfect pacing. This does include effective jump scares. Other than the film being scary, Mikael Hafström also added in elements to the story that made it very, very emotional. We eventually find out why Mike Enslin is as he is, and to be honest, there are times of when it does create a small lump in my throat, which makes the film even more powerful. So there you have it guys, there's my 6th best adaptation, and here comes my 5th best. Set in 1947, a respected banker, Andy Dufresne, is wrongfully accused for the murder of his unfaithful wife and her lover. He receives a double life sentence at Shawshank State Prison, which is a place of brutality and corruption. He then forges an unlikely friendship with a prisoner called Red, who is known as a smuggler, bringing things in and out of prison for a price. Over the next 20 years, Andy finds ways to survive and teach others about the power of hope, friendship, and redemption. Sadly, when this was released in 1994, it was a massive box office flop. But when the video came out, people then started to truly realise how amazing the film is, and it gained massive popularity. And it was, and still considered to this day, one of the greatest films ever made. Not only does King write purely terrifying stories, he also writes very gritty and powerful dramatic stories as well. It's another reason why he's my favourite writer. The director, Frank Darabont, knew exactly what he was doing with this adaptation. He kept extremely close to the novella, which is in the book Different Seasons. It's a great novella, and Frank Darabont brought it to life on screen amazingly. It's such a powerful story with really strong characters, which were portrayed stunningly from the performances of Tim Robbins, who plays Andy, Morgan Freeman as Red, Bob Gunton as the religious, corrupt Samuel Norton, who's in charge of the prison, and Clancy Brown, who plays the barbaric warden Byron Hadley. Again, we're dealing with another story that is incredibly emotional and can be rather hard to watch at times, especially with the violent scenes. But I felt they were done really tastefully. I didn't just feel that they were just there for pure shock value. And not only is the story strong, it's also incredibly inventive and downright clever. So there you have it, peeps. There's my 5th best adaptation, and now here comes my 4th best. Set in 1935 in Cold Mountain Penitentiary, Death Row, head guard Paul Edgecombe and his other guards bring in a new inmate called John Coffey, who is accused for rape and murder of 2 young girls. Paul and his guards soon learn that John is extremely kind at heart and has an extraordinary supernatural gift, making them question if he really did commit the horrendous crime. What makes this one of my favourite adaptations is because it's exactly the same as the book, virtually identical. I usually read the books before I watch the films, but I feel for this one, it doesn't matter which one you do first. You can either read the book first, then watch the film, or even watch the film, then read the book. It really doesn't matter. I mean, not that I ever found watching the films first an issue. This was another adaptation directed by Frank Darabont, and once again, he smashed it out of the park. I can tell he is a huge fan of King's books. What works the most for this film is the casting. Tom Hanks as Edgecombe was an amazing choice. I felt that he was extremely passionate about the role. Well, of course he was, he's Tom Hanks, isn't he? He's amazing in everything he does. But the actor who stole the show was Michael Clarke Duncan as John Coffey. He was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, and he deserved to win. He captured the heart of the character so well, making it so authentic. Yet again, this is another example on how much of a fantastic writer King is. Not only did he create such a powerful story, he also added in elements of shock, awe and wonder, and pure sadness. I even have to admit, after reading the book and watching the film, I bawled my eyes out. And every time I watch the film and reread the book, it has the same effect on me every time. It is an absolutely incredible film. Like I said before, it literally doesn't matter if the film is seen before reading the book. So there you have it, peeps. There's my 4th best adaptation, and now be prepared for the 3rd best. Set in 1989, a group of child outcasts, nicknamed the Losers Club, stand together to fight an evil shape-shifting clown called Pennywise, who's preying on children in their hometown, Derry, Maine. The 2nd chapter is set 27 years later, where the Losers Club are adults and are led back to Derry to fight Pennywise once again. I have reviewed these before in another one of my review videos, which were on my top 5 best horror remakes, so this review will be a slight re-repeat of that. And as you've noticed, I put 2 films into this category because Stephen King did mention that It Chapter 2 is not a sequel, it's a 2nd chapter to one unified story, and I totally agree with him. It is such a huge book, and that totally makes sense. I mean, even the child actor who plays Mike Hanlon, Chosen Jacobs, said the exact same thing. This film is a remake of the 1990 miniseries, and no disrespect towards the fans of the original, I didn't like it. I felt it was badly acted, watered down, and too cheesy. At the time, I never thought it would be remade into a feature film, let alone 2 films. After seeing both of them, I was blown away on how amazing they were. The director, Andy Muschietti, did it the way it was supposed to be. a purely epic tale of terror and strong friendship. Okay, yeah, there are differences compared to the book and the film. For example, the book is set in the 50s to the 80s, whereas the film is set in the 80s to 2019. But yet, I still felt that Andy Muschietti kept so well to the spirit of the book. He captured the main focal points of the story astonishingly. Both the child actors and adult actors did so well with their roles. They made their characters so believable. There was never a time where I didn't care for any of them. You can tell that they're all close friends in real life. Their friendship was so sweet and uplifting, making this film even more worthwhile. Okay, now, for Tim Curry's performance as Pennywise in the original miniseries, he was good at what he did, but I felt he had the wrong direction. I felt that they made Pennywise's character too funny and too over the top. The actor who played in this one, Bill Skarsgård, was outstanding, and the right direction enhanced his performance. Like the book, he made the character intense, slimy, and purely terrifying, even adding his own trademark to the role and making it completely his own. I can watch this film over and over again and never get bored. It always blows my mind every time I watch it. So there you have it, there's my third best adaptation, and now be prepared for my second best. Set many years after the previous film, The Shining, Dan Torrance is still haunted from the experiences him and his parents had at the Overlook Hotel in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. He's an alcoholic like his father was. He travels to a town in New Hampshire where he gets help to sustain his addictions. He then meets a teenage girl called Abra who has the same gift as he does. They both learn that there's an evil tribe called the True Knot who are feeding on children who shine. Dan must protect Abra at all costs. When The Shining was released in 1980, there were very mixed reviews, and it also gained a cult following. So, for this sequel, Flanagan had humongous shoes to fill, especially for King himself. And let me just say, Mr. Flanagan, I salute you, sir. Wow, he did such a great job. With his amazing talent in writing and directing, he managed to keep true to the book as much as he could, whilst adding in elements from the book and film of The Shining, which was highly impressive, because the book and the film of The Shining are vastly different from each other. I feel that many sequels today rely way too much on pure nostalgia, with no authenticity and no originality. For example, Hocus Pocus 2. No offence to fans. Mike Flanagan does use this element in this film, but he uses it in such a huge way that it doesn't feel forced. Like the book, it's a story on its own. Okay, you can say that the flashbacks of Jack and Danny do look different, but I have to give him an A for effort on that. I could tell how much of a King fan Flanagan is, and how The Shining is his all-time favourite film. It was also casted brilliantly, especially Dan, Abra, and the main villain, Rose the Hat. They were so good at their parts. To be honest, I did feel a little bit nervous when I heard that Ewan McGregor was playing the role as Dan, purely for the fact because I didn't imagine him when I was reading the book. Oh, wow, I was so wrong in being worried about that. He was absolutely brilliant. I could not recommend this film enough. It is amazing. And now, here's my number one best. Aspiring writer, former alcoholic Jack Torrance takes the job as a winter caretaker at the large isolated Overlook Hotel in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, along with his wife Wendy and his son Danny, who possesses a precognitive gift. Throughout the harsh winter months, Danny sees the powerful evil forces that dwell within the hotel, which are possessing Jack, making him descend into madness. I have talked about this film before in another review video of mine, so this will be a slight re-repeat of that. When this film was released in 1980, a lot of the book fans, including King himself, absolutely detested the film because of its major differences from the novel. And I have to say, I respectfully disagree with the negativity, because I absolutely loved what Stanley Kubrick did with the story. He made it into a complete psychological nightmare with his amazing eye. He made it so captivating and daunting to watch. What I meant by daunting was with the way how he worked with the cameras, using a lot of wide shots and beautifully smooth tracking shots with the Steadicam. He made everything within the frame look more humongous than it really was. Not only did he keep to the simplistics of the story, he also added a certain style where you're constantly thinking, was that real? Did that just really happen? Or was it just the characters hallucinating? With me being an independent filmmaker, the way he shot his films has become such a huge inspiration to me with my own films, although I do treat my cast members better than the way he treated his. This was because he was the ultimate perfectionist and he was incredibly demanding. I mean, even The Shining actually has a Guinness World Record of the most takes done in one scene, which was 127 takes, which is unbelievable. I didn't feel that uncomfortable vibe when watching the film though. His casting choices for the characters were fantastic, especially Jack Nicholson, who made the role his own and making it more scary to watch. Now, my only criticism is the casting choice and the character change of Wendy. She was very strong in the book, and Kubrick made her character very weak in the film. Other than that one negative point, this is my all-time favourite film and adaptation because of the reasons I mentioned previously. And from a non-biased point of view, again, I totally understand why the book fans and Stephen King hated the film. But hey, each one's their own. So there we go, there are my top 10 best Stephen King adaptations. I fully recommend watching all of them, but I fully recommend even more to read the books. They are all spectacular. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Take care, and I'll see you soon.